Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey everyone, welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. Today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and leadership. I'm Mazor, Kario, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today I have a very, very special guest. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Adi. How are you? It's nice to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see you here. Stephen Barth is a speaker and founder of hospitalitylawyer.com and a professor of law and leadership at the Hilton College of Global Hospitality Leadership. Stephen Barth is the author of Hospitality Law Intelligence Emotions, is an attorney and motivational speaker. And I'm sure it's going to be really, really interesting. And we're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. So before we have this discussion about emotional intelligence and leadership, how would you define emotional intelligence?
You know, very succinctly, I would say that it's about owning our emotions, right? And so to put it a little now less succinctly, Adi, I think about anytime we're frustrated, somebody's trying to teach us, something is trying to teach us patience. Anytime we're angry, somebody is trying or something is trying to teach us more patience and or self-control, or in the emotional intelligence parlance, self-regulation, right? Think if we judge people, if we get frustrated with other people, but primarily if we judge their place in the world, the way they do things, someone or something is trying to teach us empathy, right? And so when we reach out to teach somebody something else by judging them, we have to remember that we teach what we need to learn the most, right?
Yeah,
And so it's the
yeah,
mirroring concept a bit, but it's deeper than that. So I could
yeah.
go on and on about emotional intelligence, but that's what it means to me primarily and cogently is owning our emotions. Doesn't make us an emotional robot. It means feeling our emotions deeply, Adi, but it also means responding to them differently than perhaps we have so far in our life.
Yeah, I would say not only differently, the fact that you're thinking about your emotions and not acting in like autopilot, just reacting to the emotions and trying to avoid them and don't feel like not feeling bad. We were calling them bad. They're not bad, but hard in emotions or hurtful emotions. And just the fact that we let them just be in our body is something that we are not doing most of the time.
Adi, that is a perfect word. We typically react to circumstances and people and situations rather than responding to them. Our reactions are often negative because they're habitual, just like you said. We spontaneously move to those because they've been with us our entire life, and we haven't taken the time to transition or change the script in our mind from those subconscious default reactions to much more positive responses.
Yeah, I think that we're mainly talking about the fact that most people, when something is not as they expected or they wanted, or people are not reacting as they wish they would react, would be angry or sad or frustrated. And it influences the way they see the world, they perceive themselves in the world, and the way that they experience reality actually when they think this way.
It really is. Now, I don't know about in Israel, but in Houston, if you drive on the freeway, the highway, right, where cars are going fast and they're crowded, uh, we drivers here deserve combat pay, right? I mean, it's challenging. And
Yeah,
and I bring that up because it's a perfect example of
yeah.
how we can assess our own levels of emotional intelligence and connect the dots in other places. Just very quickly, if you're driving down the freeway and or do you call it a highway or a freeway?
Highway
Okay,
is
highway.
fine.
Okay, well, let's say
Yeah,
highway because we call them freeways here, but they're typically not free. But
they're
anyway,
not
we call
free.
them highways, right? So let's call them highways. So you're driving to the highway and somebody cuts you off, right? Or jumps in front of you or stops suddenly. What's
Yeah,
our first reaction? Well, and I always add no sign language, please, because
yeah,
in the United States, people, the symbol
yeah,
I'm going for.
yeah.
But think
We're more
about,
cursing.
yeah,
We are
right.
express ourselves.
We get angry, but here's the most important: we get angry, right? And we get mad, and then sometimes we chase them down. And it sadly in the United States, people get shot over this because of the
Wow.
proliferation of weapons, right? It's horrible what's going on. But here's the point: if if the person that got cut off, if they don't react to being cut off, what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened if
Yeah.
you don't react because to your point, it's those reactions that bring significance to something or circumstances or an event, right? And we're just reacting to that and making it worse and letting somebody we've never met in our life, never going to meet them again, as long as we don't chase them down, and,
Yeah.
and we let them impact our emotions. We let them create this space for us to become angry. So the real question is, can anyone make you angry? And the answer is not
No.
unless we let them. Exactly right.
Yeah.
That is emotional intelligence, understanding that concept. That's why I say it's so important to own your emotions, right? And develop your emotional intelligence. And last but not least, in that example is this: if you are getting angry on the freeway, that's probably your conflict resolution style, right? So you're probably getting angry with your spouse, your significant other, your children, your coworkers. You see, and you have to own that, and you have to go, right? What's that song? Things that make you go, Well,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence is filled with those moments. So
Yeah.
I hope that analogy brings some clarity for some people about emotional intelligence. And we can bring up a
Yeah.
few more as we go on, but I like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, you mentioned this moment.
Yeah.
It's usually not in the moment. Maybe afterwards we'll think about it. But in the moment, in order to do that, you need to have this like gap, just a
Yeah.
gap between what I thought that he is like irresponsible, he's bad, he needs to learn his lesson, he's underestimating me, whatever. Like what I think about his way of driving and then what I decide to do with it. I could whatever think whatever I want to think. Like, do I need to react? So I can think that he needs to learn the lesson, but am I the one to teach this lesson, right?
That's so right, Adi. I tell people all the time, look, if you want to teach people how to drive, join the police force, join the highway patrol, right? But you're not going to change that driver's behavior by yelling and screaming. The power for you is staying calm and giving that other driver grace, right? So, and that's, as you just pointed out, it is nearly impossible to do that in that instant when it occurs. So, emotional intelligence comes from practicing emotional intelligence and reminding ourselves daily of the type of person we want to be. I want to be kind. I want to be understanding. I want to be non-judgmental. I want to give people grace, right? And so because listen, I'm big on accountability. I
Yeah,
think personal accountability is important. And when people hear me say this, they're like, oh my God, somebody has to teach them. Right. Somebody does and somebody
yeah,
will. Normally karma, right? But it will happen. But it does not have to be you.
yeah,
Right. I have to
yeah,
remind myself of that every day with people that smoke. If people are smoking around me, they better be on fire. right?
Yeah.
I'm very protective of my personal space and the air that I breathe. And it's taken me many years to realize I'm not going to change that concept one smoker at a time, right? I'm not. And the flip side of that, Adi, is smoking is a horrible addiction, as has vaping become now.
Yeah.
But it's and so what I've really learned from my intense triggering of people smoking around me or vaping around me is that I need to have more empathy for the addiction and the
Right.
severity of the addiction. And it sadly, I wouldn't listen before, but I tried to get myself off of sugar. Adi, do you like sugar?
Wow.
See,
I do.
I love it. And I tried to get, my daughter's a nutritionist, and she said, Dad, you've got to cut back on your sugar. So I thought, well, I can do that. Oh my gosh,
That's
I
hard.
I was so addicted. And that instant, that moment I went, wow, dude, you've got to give people grace that have addictions. And that has been part of my journey, understanding better about emotional intelligence and what it's about. Accountability is one thing, I get it, and I'm all about it. But I also now clearly have a much deeper concept and appreciation for empathy and grace.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. By the way, I read a really good book about addiction from Gabo Mate. I don't know if you
Oh,
know
not
this person.
familiar, huh?
Oh, you should. He's
Yeah.
really smart,
Okay.
and he was a doctor, and he talks about addiction and about empathy and trauma, and in general, he has this really good book about addiction. He was a doctor in I think in Canada, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
So he treated these people, and they had these really horrible life stories that
Mm,
made them more susceptible to being addicted.
mm.
And when you're thinking about it, like why do people are getting addicted? Doesn't matter if it's alcohol or drugs or smoking or sugar or working too much or sports.
Well,
We have lots
whatever
of
it is,
kinds of
right?
addictions, right?
Gambling, right? Yes.
Yeah. So each one of them has a really good reason to do so. And once you're saying, okay, I'm not doing it, I'm aware of my body, I want to be healthy, and they don't care about their bodies and they're killing themselves, whatever. It's so righteous, right?
So
Just
righteous.
thinking,
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm better, right?
Right.
I know things much better than this guy who's so
Right.
stupid
Yeah.
to do these things.
Yeah.
But you don't really know what happened in his life, what he went through, if we're talking about the driving, maybe he had this really terrible day and he got fired. You don't
Yeah.
really know
You don't
what's
know.
going on with this person and what's
Yeah.
going on in his life. So just some kind of humility. We don't know,
We
right?
don't know.
So
We don't know other people's stories. And when we begin to judge them, we are substituting our perception, our assumptions for their story. And
right.
99.999% of the time, we are totally wrong.
Yeah. I think that another thing that I remind myself when I get mad, and I do, and I curse a lot. My kids tell me you're cursing too much. So, but I am telling you, it's a way to transform bad energy just into a word, and then it's out there, and then it's not inside me. But when I think about it, I always think about the fact that we need to be more like soft the way that we perceive our world. We don't really know. We could add a question mark to most of the things that we're saying, and we're trying at our best to do like good decisions and to do good things in our lives, and even in our own lives we're not always doing the right thing, so we're trying to do so. So I don't want to imagine if I need to educate all the people on the roads in Israel. It's like too much for me, right? So
Good for
I have
you.
my own bag, you know.
Yeah, yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
You know,
So
that gets us back, Adi, to this is not an overnight process. This is a lifetime commitment of setting our intentions to transition from those reactive instantaneous reactions to much more reasoned responses. And that's what I wrote, that you mentioned that ebook I wrote, Intelligent Emotions. And
Right.
in there is a list. And I tell people, emotional intelligence is one of the few things I've found in my lifetime that I really believe can change people's destiny. And I ask people, if how many of you would spend 1 minute a day to be more peaceful and more productive and more content in your life? Well, everybody says yes, of course,
Yeah.
right? But
Right.
I know there's very few magic bullets, but emotional intelligence really is. It's just a matter of rescripting I shouldn't say just a matter. For some people, it's going to be much more difficult. For others, it's going to be easier. But generally speaking, if we will devote a minute a day to reviewing our script, and I've given some sample scripts in that book, and in just 1 minute a day, in the morning when you wake up, and maybe 30 seconds at night before you go to bed, to kind of get your subconscious rolling and revising that script in your subconscious, people will be amazed how it can impact their life and seriously become more peaceful, more productive, and more content, better relationships with their spouses, significant others, better relationships with their children, which are so important today, given COVID and the divisiveness, not just in the United States. Israel is really divided, right?
Right.
Almost every country is really
Yeah.
divided right now. So it's so important to me that we take a different approach with our children and surround them with love and confidence and positivity. And that's all part of emotional intelligence as well. But it's that 1 minute a day of rescripting that I think is the most powerful thing we can do to establish emotional intelligence for ourselves.
So what do you mean when you're saying rescripting? What is the meaning of that?
Right. So do you remember we were talking a little while ago about you raised the great word, reacting. Remember, so we all have these default negative reactions built into our subconscious. Think of them as viruses. Okay. So when I say the word virus, what does everybody think? They think computer,
Yeah.
right? They think, oh, there's a virus in my computer. And
Yeah,
what
but
our
right now
answer?
most people would say COVID, but we could say computer.
Yeah. Okay. Same thing.
Yeah.
But if somebody thinks COVID, they go to a doctor, right? We're
Yeah.
going to get well. If there's a virus in your computer, what are we going to do? We're going to clean it out. We're going to take out that software. We're going to reinstall it. But we're never going to just let the COVID sit there. We're never just going to let the virus infect our hardware and send it on to other people. We're going to respond proactively and make it better. But we don't do that with our subconscious. All of these default negative reactions, whether it's frustrating when the computer doesn't work, getting frustrated if the computer doesn't work, getting angry on the freeway, yelling and screaming when we don't get our way, right? So there are lots of examples. We can go on and on. But the thing is, we have to rescript in our subconscious when those triggers happen, when the computer is slow, when the children get home late, when people at work don't do what we ask them to do. We have to rescript what our default reaction is, which is impatience, frustration, anger, lack of control, defensiveness, insecurity, jealousy, right? We have to rescript in our mind to things like patience, grace, empathy, kindness. Those are the things that we need to transition. And I say rescript because it's just a negative reactionary script in our mind. And we all have the ability to change that. It just takes a little practice and a little time and the intention to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree. So why do you think emotional intelligence is so important for leaders? We're talking about like people in their own lives and the way that they handle, but why leaders need to learn that?
I first think leaders, my focus on leadership is inspiration. I think leaders should be inspirational, but I also think, Adi, they should be models of behavior. Like parents in a home are models of behavior, right? If you think about it, my belief is people are not born to hate. They are not born hating. They don't come out of the womb hating, right? They learn that someplace. Typically, it's learned behavior because it's modeled in the home or it's modeled in other leadership capacities, businesses, organizations, etc. Right? So we have to realize that leadership is not just inspirational, it's also about modeling. And so I think leaders that lack emotional intelligence, in other words, they want to control everything. In other words, they get frustrated easily. They don't have patience. Most importantly, we see that they retaliate when they don't get their way, right? That's just a horrible need for control. And that is not modeling healthy behavior. So, what I like to say, leaders that don't have emotional intelligence, they're like a hurricane. They come in with a big blow and then they leave enormous damage when they leave, right? Positive leaders, they come in with stability and they come in supporting people. We achieve our a consensus and common goals. And they're also leaders with emotional intelligence realize that they work from the bottom up, not the top down. I'll give you an example. In my belief system, leaders are the foundation of an organization. Is that fair? You know, they bring the strength, they bring the experience, they bring the education, the knowledge, the know-how. All right. They're the foundation. Would we ever put the foundation of a building on the top of a building?
No,
Never, because it
it's
would
always
be it's always on the bottom, whether it's a hotel, a restaurant, apartment building, office, whatever it is, the foundation is always at the bottom. So the first thing, why it's so important that leaders have emotional intelligence is they recognize that. They realize they're there to support people, not to push down on them, not to force them to do what they think they should do, but to turn them loose. You'd much rather say whoa than giddy up, right? You really want people to thrive, and to do that, you've got to be at the bottom. And the other thing people with emotional intelligence understand is that 99% of all organization charts don't plug the customers into their organization chart.
right.
Right? Well, if you plug your customers into a top down organization chart, they're going to be at the customer's going to be at the bottom because they're in touch with all the line employees who are at the bottom in your org chart.
Right.
Nobody in their right mind would put their customers at the bottom of their prioritizations, right? Nobody would.
Right.
The customers go at the top. Your line employees go at the top because they support the customers. Then your supervisors support your line employees. Then the leadership supports the supervisors. So
Yeah.
that's why I think EI is so crucial for leadership. And the second most important aspect of that is empathy, for all the reasons we've already talked about.
Yeah. But correct me if I'm wrong, but most leaders that I know of would say, I need to be powerful. I need to present something which is very stable. I need to know things even more than others. And my inspiration to others is because I'm smarter, I'm better, I know how to do things. I will teach them how to do things, right?
Right. But what they're missing is the best leaders, the best success stories in the world have come from individuals at times, but usually it's from a leader that has surrounded themselves with really bright people, and that leader is not jealous of them, and that leader recognizes the value that they bring. And so you really surround yourself with good people, oftentimes better people than you are, but that takes a very high level of emotional intelligence to be able to do that. But it does happen, and when it
Yeah.
happens, it is powerful.
The first person that comes to my mind when we have this conversation is Steve Jobs,
Yeah,
right? And most people would say that he's like so successful, of course,
yeah,
smart, and a great leader because he knows what he wants to get and he gets everyone in the same level of perfection as he will wants it to be. But if I'm not mistaken, again, I'm not an expert in Steve Jobs. He was not he was not that good in the aspect that you are talking about, right?
right, right. His ex-wife, it appears, given what she's been doing with her money, the same thing with Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. They tend to see the world differently than their exes, and they maybe they learned from those experiences, right? I'm sure they did, and we all evolve, right, over time. And I think it was Muhammad Ali that said, just to make that point, that if we still think the same way at 50 that we did as when we were 20 years old, we've wasted the last 30 years, right?
Yeah,
And
makes
so,
sense.
the women in their lives, it appears, had a much higher level of emotional intelligence and an understanding of what that incredible responsibility of leadership means, truly means. It doesn't mean give me more. It doesn't mean pull the red carpet up behind me. It doesn't mean be unkind to people, be greedy. It doesn't mean I get to stay in power forever. What it means is we've been blessed for a period of time. We need to appreciate that, and we need to, I think, help people achieve a common goal or our vision, but we do it together, and we give everybody the tools they need to do the job and support them in order to do it. And that creates long term viability and sustainability of a mission or a vision for a business. Doesn't mean it can't change, Adi, right? The best businesses modify a lot, right? But I think about Google's, they have lots of little sayings that they've used to make them so successful in a global powerhouse. But one of the ones that I latch onto is fail quickly, right? In
I
most
think it's
businesses,
it's Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, but I'm not sure about that one.
yeah, I think it's Google. I could be mistaken, but I think it's Google. But anyway,
Yeah.
uh, it's fail quickly, and maybe they adopt it as well. Maybe they all do. But that the
Maybe.
idea, right? The idea is that a lot of businesses react strongly and punitively to failure. But if we're not failing, we're not trying. We're not trying different things. We're not stepping outside the box. We're not being creative. We're not being innovative, right? You have to support mistakes, but because you support the effort. Now, that doesn't mean you support the same mistake over and over again, right? But you if you're going to fail, fail quickly, but get it out there. See if it works. If it doesn't, go on to the next one.
Right. Again, it's a way that a person perceives himself and he perceives success. What you mentioned, that the fact that I'm teaching others or I'm expecting or even willing to think about people after me, and I'm teaching them how to be instead of me, instead of like trying to avoid them or to put them aside for them not to threaten my state and my power. And I think it's related to the way that we perceive success, because success right now is like winning it all the time.
Winning at all costs. And we don't have to look any further than, being a lawyer, I have some insight about lawyers and law school. But lawyers are the only group of people that I'm aware of, Adi, that go to school for 3 years in the United States to learn how to get their way.
Yeah,
Right? That's
right.
exactly. And as long as lawyers were had integrity, and as long as lawyers complied with their oath, being a lawyer was a very prestigious thing to be. But when lawyers started using the law and their persuasive capabilities to encourage immoral things or to shield lawbreakers from the law and accountability. And it just really broke down trust in the system, at least certainly in the United States, which was one of our greatest assets, was our judicial system and the independence of our judicial system. But all of that has, I don't want to say pervasively corrupt, but it's certainly much different than it has been. But the point is that you can see this, Adi, and you can see the lack of emotional intelligence in lawyers, that in their professional life, they'll do whatever it takes to get their way. Yelling, screaming, lying, whatever it is, manipulating the law, whatever it is. And then they'll take that same construct into their homes. And they'll treat their significant other or their children the same way. And it's just a horrible mix of humanity. And it really creates real challenges and friction for relationships. But it's all a lack of emotional intelligence. It's a lack of self-awareness. It's a lack of not understanding two separate paradigms, professional paradigm where people are used to that kind of nonsense, into your home, which should be loving and kind and supportive. You know, people say to me all the time, no, my children have to learn about the world. And I go, hey, my belief is, in your home, your children need to experience love and support and kindness. The world will give them all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I
So
totally agree.
you
I
need to be
totally
the
agree.
foundation built with love and kindness and support.
Yeah.
My opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I have four kids, and I think a
Yeah.
lot about what I need to give them, you know, to be content and happy and have good lives.
Good.
At the beginning, I would say, like 10 years ago, I would say what would make them successful, but I'm not using these words right now. So I would say what would make them content with their life. And I think it's much more about the emotional competencies and the way that they perceive the world than knowledge. Knowledge has no real meaning. It's changing all the time.
All the time.
And you need to have first a way to get to a place, hopefully your home, that would love you and get it to know you and appreciate you.
Yes.
Afterwards, lots of things, right? But that's the beginning,
Yeah. And always be curious.
right?
You know, if we can get children to be curious, you know, if we couple energy and curiosity equals learning, right?
Right.
Energy plus curiosity equals learning. And how cool is that? And how that drives contentment in people, because they, for a lifetime, right? That's a lifetime achievement that we can work on, as is emotional intelligence, I might add. Right? You can
Yeah.
work on this your entire life. And I read it, teach it, speak on it every day, and I still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, that's good. Regarding curiosity, I think it's very important for leaders to still be curious and not think,
Great
I
point.
know it, I know it all. I just know it. I don't need to learn more. I've been in this industry for 30 years. Now I know everything, right?
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So another thing that I wanted to talk to you is about a leader expecting and thinks other expect from him to be perfect. And why should he stop trying to be perfect?
You know, as it's been said many times by many more people than me, and smarter than me, is that perfection often gets in the way of progress,
Right.
whether it's in a relationship, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your significant other, and certainly in the workplace and in organizations. People that are driven by perfection because they don't have the self-awareness to recognize that they're human and that they cannot make a mistake without taking it personally or falling apart, or their self-esteem drop, they project that on, typically on, everybody else around them. And that can create severe friction. I go back to the lawyer example I gave you. See, lawyers, doctors too have this. They have to be perfect, right? I mean, if you're doing heart surgery, it has to be perfect. If you're going to trial, one little word out of your documents can destroy the whole case. It has to be perfect. But that's your choice. That's your profession. That's you decided to live that way. That doesn't mean for your children, your significant other, all of your other folks in your organization. Perfection can really get in the way of progress. Now, there's a time for perfection, like I mentioned, medicine, legal, there are opportunities. But again, you have to be mindful of what that kind of stress that puts on people, and you have to acknowledge that stress, and that's where the grace comes in. If you want them to get to a certain place and you expect that level of performance, you have to realize that you have to work from the bottom up to support that level of ability and performance. And it's not easy.
It's not. Changing yourself and expecting things from yourself, and instead of telling others to change or do whatever you do, is much harder, right?
And rarely, Adi, will those people in those positions, the lawyers and the doctors, or other high-level entrepreneurs that have made it their way, right? They're control freaks, typically, and I mean that with love, right? Listen, when we
Yeah,
say a control freak, it just means somebody has to get their way, right? And they'll
sure.
do whatever it takes to do it, including retaliation when they don't get their way. And if you think about that, that's really an unhealthy way to live your life, right? They don't know how
Yeah.
to compromise. What's that story? That doctor said, well, sure, I can compromise as long as I get my way.
Yeah,
Right.
of
But
course.
it's that, yeah, but they rarely will take the time to devote to teach people what they need to know to perform at that high level they want. They just expect people to get it. That takes us back to your point early on, Adi, in our conversation about we don't know everybody's story. We don't know how people learn. We don't know, to an extent, generally we do, but not specifically this person in your group. And you have to take the time to get to know them. And if you want them to perform at a level, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes love, it takes grace.
Yeah.
Punishment after a mistake, we know that's not going to help.
Yeah. We mentioned a few like times the lawyers, and I'm interested to know if there is any kind of research about emotional intelligence and lawyers, because we mentioned them so many times.
Well, I have spoken about that particular topic but not specifically based on legal lawyers and EI, but mostly based on the general concepts of EI and what I've taken away from it. But it really gets us back to the control issue and learning how to get your way. But the inability to recognize, due to a severe lack of self-awareness, that it becomes pervasive in the rest of their life, myself included. When I first got out of law school, I did not know how to relate to people that were not lawyers. It took me years to understand that not everybody knows what I know about the law. Not everybody knows what I know about getting your way. And so people say, well, you use that to your advantage. No, that you want to if you're a leader, you're there to inspire people to achieve a common vision and to build a consensus. If you think your leadership is about getting your way, you need to go back to your MBA program and get your money back, because you didn't learn a lot.
Yeah. And what you mentioned is that it's all built on emotional intelligence and relationships, actually. And relationships are so, so important in our lives. But surely, as leaders, we need to understand that we're working with people and not with human resources, as we call them.
Adi, if I can tell you a story, it'll take me a couple of minutes. Is that okay?
Sure.
Don't know
I'm
how we're doing
interested
on
to
time,
hear.
but so I had the very good fortune of growing up in Dallas, Texas, and a very good fortune of having a best friend whose father was in the construction business. And a lot of your viewers and listeners today will know the name of somebody I'm going to mention, because his son has been in the news lately. But I'll preface it that way. So
Okay.
my friend's name was Jake. I called his father Mr. Jake, right? So Mr. Jake built warehouses. He got into the warehouse for distribution purposes in Dallas 70 years ago now. And at the tipping point when that became so important, right? All these big box businesses needed distribution outlets, and he was going to build their warehouses. And they had kind of a novel way to do it. They would pour the concrete walls on the ground and they'd tilt them up and fasten them all together. Fascinating. And so he bid on a warehouse, I believe, the first warehouse for Mr. Trammell Crow. Mr. Crow at one time was the largest landowner in the United States.
Wow.
His son Harlan Crow has been in the news lately with the Supreme Court of the US, is why I prefaced it
Wow.
that way. Yeah. But Mr. Jake was being honored at his 50th year party being in business, and Mr. Crow was there.
Wow.
And there were only about 100 of us in the room, and I was so honored to be there. But this is what came out. Mr. Crow stood up and he said, we're here to honor Mr. Jake, and people have asked me why Mr. Jake has built almost every one of my warehouses for the last 50 years. And he said, here's the reason why. He said, he built my first warehouse. He finished it early. He sent us a final invoice. We paid it. 2 weeks later, Mr. Jake walked into my office and handed me a check. And he said, we made too much money on this warehouse. And Mr.
Wow.
Crow said, and we've built 500 warehouses. I don't remember what the number is, but it was a big number. Warehouses together, and we've never had one piece of paper between us.
Wow.
That, Adi, is trust. That is leadership. That is relationship building, to your point. So I just think that story should remind us all that leaders should do business with people they trust. Compliance is important, of course, but more important to me, do we trust the people we're working with?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a great story. Thank you for that. So I have like a few more questions, but we're almost out of time.
Sure.
So I would ask you only one question. What's your number one tip for leaders today?
Wow. Okay. I think the most important thing leaders can do today is develop a sense of empathy. And now, I have a friend that cautions me about that. And he says empathy in negotiations can be a drawback. And we don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but I do think your listeners need to heed that comment. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in empathy. Empathy is like looking at a chicken salad from a chicken's perspective,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, right.
You're talking to my heart. I'm vegan, so it's good for me to hear.
That is exactly right. And so it's not just putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. It's understanding their story, as you pointed out, that is so important. And I just know so few leaders that take the time to do that. So I believe that empathy is one of the most important qualities and characteristics that leaders need to have today. Setting direction, of course, is also crucial, but I'm not sure you can survive without either one of those. But empathy is what I see lacking most in leaders that fail.
Yeah, I think that I would say that empathy is lacking in many parts of the society, but it's the most impact you get from people who are in power, meaning leadership.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So where could people hear more about you and your work and contact you?
Well, thank you for that. They can reach me at the University of Houston at the Hilton College. They can reach me at hospitalitylawyer.com through the contact. they can go to stephenbarth.com and send an email through that, or they can just Google me and probably learn more than it'll nauseate them what's out there. So, but they can reach me through all those areas. And but I would encourage them, Adi, to Google Intelligent Emotions, that book. It's on Smashwords, but they can locate it different. It's really inexpensive. I think it's less than $3, but it's short. It's an ebook. It's meant to be 30 pages, maybe 25, 30 pages. But most importantly, it has some of those sample transitions, rescripting tools that we talked about that I really think are powerful, and I hope they'll take advantage of those.
Yeah, it sounds like a good advice. I would go and check it out. So I advise others to go and check it out. And I want to thank you for your time, Stephen. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and insightful and lots of fun. So thanks.
The pleasure was mine, Adi. I learned a lot as well, which is always a good combination. Thank you very much for having me. And I really appreciate all you're doing for the leadership space and innovation. And I hope you'll connect some of that innovation to the hospitality industry, which is where my passion lies, because they need it often.
You don't know what you're talking about. You've never been in a hotel in Israel. So whatever you have in the US is so much better.
That may be. We'll work together to change that.
Sure. And if you're ever like in Israel, you could come over and I'll take you for a short guided tour in Israel. So you're
great.
welcome.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Adi.
Pleasure. Me too. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about what I do, go to invincibleinnovation.com, and I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya. I'm Mazor Kario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.